As promised, right now live, House Judiciary Chairman Jerry Nadler joining us for an exclusive interview, his first since the Mueller report hearing. Good day to you, Chairman. We'll get to that vote. But first, on that hearing you led yesterday, what, in your view, did it accomplish? What did it show the American public?
Well, what it accomplished was to start going through the evidence in the Mueller report. And we had not only John Dean, the former White House counsel, and the former chief Republican counsel for the Judiciary Committee, interestingly enough, but two veteran U.S. attorneys, veteran U.S. prosecutors, whom you know from MSNBC, Barbara McQuaid and Joyce Vance, who went through the instances of obstruction of justice in detail that are laid out in the Mueller report, and who said why, in many of the cases, the evidence was in the report by itself was very sufficient to establish a criminal case of obstruction of justice against the president, and why, if they were still U.S. attorneys and were presented with that evidence, they would have prosecuted and prosecuted successfully. That was obviously very important to show the American people that no person is above the law and that we have to start getting this information. Now, the fact is that it would have been better, obviously, had we had the fact witnesses, Don McGahn, the former counsel to the president, who could have spoken about what he is reported to have said in the Mueller report. But the administration has, down the line, opposed our subpoenas and not complied with congressional subpoenas. Which is why what we did today, the House passing a resolution enforcing a contempt resolution, giving us the power to enforce our subpoenas in court, was so important.
So you mentioned that there. You voted today on this contempt move. These officials, especially lawyers, but really anyone responsible, doesn't want to be held in contempt. It's a serious step you've taken. But you've also stopped short of criminal contempt for Attorney General Barr. And as you've said, and we've been reporting, that's because you say there's a breakthrough and him providing evidence to you. Why did you stop short of criminal contempt for Mr. McGahn?
We did not stop short of contempt for Mr. McGahn.
Criminal contempt.
Well, the resolution empowers contempt, period, civil or criminal, frankly. If Mr. McGahn does not comply with our subpoena promptly, we will go to court to force his compliance, and we'll use the contempt power. That is the whole point of the resolution, and we will use it on Mr. McGahn. We'll use it on any other witness, for instance, Hope Hicks or Annie Donaldson, if they don't comply with our subpoenas and testify and give us the information and the documents that we have requested. Now, with respect to Attorney General Barr, our subpoena asked him a couple of months ago for the redacted portions of the Mueller report and for underlying evidence in it. They refused to give it to us, which is why we cited him for contempt in the committee. But now we've gotten, as of yesterday, or the day before yesterday, yesterday morning actually, we have an agreement with the Justice Department that they will give us access to the redacted portions of the Mueller report, except for the grand jury evidence. We will go to court to get the grand jury evidence, and they have agreed to give us, in priority order, with us establishing the priority, the underlying evidence under the Mueller report. If they do that in good faith, then there's no point to going forward with a contempt proceeding against Attorney General Barr. If they don't do what they've agreed to do in good faith, then we will proceed with a contempt proceeding against the Attorney General.
So that's a breakthrough. I mean, people ask whether the pressure works. What you're saying is, if they hold up to what they've now told you in writing they'll do, that your pressure and the contempt strategy did work. Does that material include getting, for example, the FBI interview, the so-called 302
Yes.
with McGahn?
Yeah. Well, it includes the 302s that we asked for under the Mueller report, and that would include 302s from McGahn.
Which is big. I mean, there's been this whole discussion that McGahn is the most cited witness in the Mueller probe, that he appeared to outline things that Donald Trump secretly did, that he thought would stay secret, that formed what Mueller viewed as criminal evidence against the sitting president. What do you want to learn? What should our viewers care about in that interview that you say you're going to obtain?
Well, we want to know exactly what the president said and what he said, and we should hear and the American people should hear the first person accounts of what is recounted in the Mueller report, and maybe some things that aren't. Did the president ask him to fire Mueller, ask McGahn to fire Mueller because he wanted to stop the investigation? Did the president ask or ask McGahn, after he refused to do so, to create a false record stating that he'd never been asked that. That is total, complete evidence of obstruction of justice, violation of the criminal law. Those are some of the things we want to ask him.
And if you
and it's
have
laid
that,
out it's laid out in the Mueller report, but we want to hear that from him firsthand.
And Mr. Chairman, if you have that, do you view that as education for the American public to hear that from, again, a loyal Trump aide? This is not some critic. This is Donald Trump's aide and innermost advisor in the White House saying these things that sound really bad? Or is that for your colleagues to try to push others who maybe have not been as concerned about this as you have, or at least aren't moving towards contempt votes and impeachment?
It's for our colleagues. It's also for the American people. The American people have a right to know what happened. You remember the Mueller report came out and said what it said, and then the Attorney General came out and lied about what was in the Mueller report. And for 5 or 6 weeks, all you had out there was the Attorney General misrepresenting what was in the Mueller report and saying no collusion, no obstruction, the President echoing that. And that's the dominant ethos that was established. Now, the Mueller report doesn't say that. It doesn't say no collusion. It says not enough evidence to convict beyond a reasonable doubt the crime of criminal conspiracy, but it does show massive evidence of cooperation between the Trump campaign and the Russians, of the Trump campaign knowing that the Russians were trying to help them and welcoming that help. It's what I normally would call collusion. It shows considerable evidence, substantial evidence, in the words of the Mueller report, of criminal obstruction of justice, and one purpose of the hearings is not just for people to read the report. People are not going to read a 448-page report, but it's important that the witnesses who give us this information, the person who heard from the president illegal instructions, ought to testify to that.
And and I would say, some people read the report. I know you read the report, your staff, many people who follow this, but I take your point in terms of how the information gets out there. Now, you mentioned earlier, and I want to circle back to make sure we're understanding this. You said, well, contempt is contempt. The history, as you know, was the Republicans held Attorney General Holder in criminal contempt. And the Democrats, when dealing with the Bush administration, will put up, so folks remember, with White House officials Bolton and Myers, they were held in both criminal and civil contempt. When people hear reports that McGahn is only civil contempt, is that less? Is that a difference? Or what is your response to that?
No. The resolution gives us the power for civil or criminal contempt. And I think that's why that threat is probably why the Department of Justice, after stonewalling us since March, finally made this agreement, which hopefully they will in good faith carry out.
Understood. Another thing we want to get you on the record for, because it's always interesting when we have you on the beat, is, Mr. Chairman, these reports, I'm sure you've seen in Politico, they say, quote, Chairman Nadler has twice urged Speaker Pelosi in private to open a formal impeachment inquiry. Is that true?
Well, I agree with Nancy Pelosi 100% that all options must be on the table. And what we are doing now and what we will continue to do is to get out the information through the resolution, through the lawsuits that we're going to bring to enforce our subpoenas, through the hearings that we're conducting. Yesterday was the very first hearing on this whole subject. We will conduct more hearings. We'll get the fact witnesses, and we'll have to see where it goes. And all options are certainly on the table. And it's very important, by the way, for us to go to court, as this resolution we adopted today enables us to do, to get the witnesses, to get the information, and to get the grand jury material, which we will do, which we have to do also.
But when people say, oh, Chairman Nadler is pushing Pelosi on this, that's basically true or basically not true?
Well, Nancy Pelosi has said that all options are on the table. They are on the table, and when we get more information, as this process continues, we'll have to make decisions down the road.
You've also been negotiating with now former Special Counsel Mueller. Has he agreed to come in voluntarily? Is there a date by which, if he does not, you would subpoena him?
Well, we're carrying on conversations with him, and he will come in, and if we have to subpoena him, we will.
Would that be, say, by the end of the summer if he doesn't come in?
I would think it would be way before that.
Way before that? By the end of June?
I'm not going to comment. I don't know.
Understand, and my job to ask the questions, but I respect that you have a process going. When you say this is the beginning, I wonder what else, in your view, before I let you go, Mr. Chairman, is important for the Congress to probe from the Mueller report. We talked a little bit about some of the issues in Volume 2, McGahn and those obstruction issues. Are there other things that concern you, especially given what's happening now with Attorney General Barr, when we read the reports about the way the president demanded things, personal loyalties and other things from law enforcement? And is there any way that you think that affects patrolling in your oversight role, what's happening now?
Those all go to questions of obstruction of justice, which goes really, it's fundamental. It's not a process question. Obstruction of justice is fundamental to our system of justice and to making sure that the president is not a king, that he is not above the law, that he has to follow the law, and that he can't escape the law and assume powers of a king against congressional powers. Those are some of the key issues. We also have to obviously look into all the questions about the collusion of the Trump campaign with the Russians. You know, remember what this is about. This is not about a private sexual affair, as the last impeachment inquiry was 20 years ago. This is about an attack on our country, an attack on our democracy by the Russian government, and about the fact that many people in the Trump campaign clearly cooperated. Certainly they knew about it. The report says they welcomed that attack. They welcomed the help. They cooperated. Some people in the campaign clearly cooperated in various ways. And it's clear collusion. And we have to look into where the laws are broken, but just as important as that, how the Trump campaign worked with the Russians to attack our campaign, and what we can do to make sure to hold the people involved accountable, but also to make sure that kind of thing can never happen again. Which I noticed that both, I think it was Donald Trump Jr. and Rudy Giuliani saw nothing wrong with getting foreign assistance in the next campaign, and that is beyond belief.
Well, Chairman Nadler, on the day of these votes and right after the hearing, fascinating to hear where you're headed and some of the news you just made. And thanks for joining us on The Beat with your first interview since that hearing, sir.
Well, thank you, Ari.
I appreciate it, Mr. Chairman.